So members of the Proud Boys organization are on trial right now in federal court in Washington, D.C., charged with a seditious conspiracy and other crimes for their attempted violent overthrow of our democracy. And they just announced that they have a very important witness they want to put on the stand to testify in their defense at their trial. That witness? Donald Trump. What could possibly go wrong? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. Okay friends, let's have a little fun with this story. Members of the Proud Boys organization are on trial presently in federal court in Washington, D.C. for attacking the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021, for attempting to violently overthrow our democracy, for attempting to stop the certification of Joe Biden's election win, and now the defendants, the so-called Proud Boys, have announced that they want to call a witness to the stand in their defense. They want to call to the stand the leader of the Proud Boys. No, not this guy, Enrique Tarrio, the chairman of the Proud Boys. No, they want to call the actual leader, Donald Trump, Mr. Stand Back and Stand By himself. Let's start with a new reporting from the Washington Post. Headline, Proud Boys move to subpoena Trump in seditious conspiracy trial. Some of the Proud Boys have argued that the former president should be on trial, not them. Well, here is a rare moment where I'm going to agree with the Proud Boys, at least in part. Donald Trump should be on trial for ordering the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Of course, the Proud Boys should also be on trial because they actually attacked the Capitol on January 6th. That Washington Post article continues. Leaders in the far-right Proud Boys group, accused in federal court of plotting to use violence to keep Donald Trump in power, are asking the Justice Department to help them force the former president to testify. And here's what one of the defense attorneys for the Proud Boys has said, quote, "At all times relevant, Trump was president of the United States, and it's the government's obligation to produce him," attorney Norm Pattis said in court Thursday. His client, Joseph Biggs, is one of 5 defendants accused of engaging in a seditious conspiracy to attack the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Pattis did not explain what defendants hope to learn from Trump, only that he was joined in the subpoena effort by attorneys for co-defendant Dominic Pezzola. He said he needed help from the government to serve a subpoena on Trump because the U.S. Secret Service continues to protect the former president. But here's some insight into what the defendants hope Donald Trump will say if they put him on the stand. In opening statements last month, an attorney for longtime Proud Boys chairman Henry Enrique Tarrio argued that the former president was the one responsible for the deadly riot. And here again, friends, I find myself agreeing with the Proud Boys. Donald Trump is responsible for the deadly attack on the Capitol. Donald Trump is criminally responsible for what happened on January 6th because he ordered it, he directed it, he incited it. But here's the thing. The Proud Boys are criminally responsible too, as are the Oath Keepers and everybody else who attacked the Capitol that day. Even if they were doing it on Donald Trump's orders, that doesn't exonerate them. Donald Trump is criminally responsible, as are the Proud Boys and everyone else who attacked the Capitol that day. Okay, friends, now that we've set up the issue, let's go to a quick Team Justice Law School class and talk about why Donald Trump will not appear as a witness at the Proud Boys trial. You know, I actually teach this topic to my criminal justice students at George Washington University, and I call this particular lecture "When Constitutional Rights Collide." Here's why. The Proud Boys, who are currently on trial, have a Sixth Amendment right to call witnesses in their defense. They have a Sixth Amendment right to compel the attendance of witnesses, as do all people who are involved in criminal trials as defendants. Here is in part how the Sixth Amendment reads. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor. So the Proud Boys, the defendants on trial, have a Sixth Amendment right, a constitutional right to subpoena, to compel the attendance of witnesses in their favor, including Donald Trump, if he has any relevant evidence to provide. But here's the thing. The witnesses who are subpoenaed, who are compelled to testify by defendants who are exercising their Sixth Amendment rights, the witnesses have Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. Here is how the Fifth Amendment reads in part. No person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. How about we update that to or herself? So that is the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination that the witness has if he or she is compelled, is subpoenaed to testify. Okay, friends, let's state this one self-evident truth. Donald Trump has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and he knows how to use it. We saw him invoke it more than 400 times in the case that New York Attorney General Tish James has brought against him and his adult children and the Trump Organization. So Donald Trump has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, as does everybody who is called to testify, subpoenaed, compelled to testify. And Donald Trump inarguably has a Fifth Amendment privilege when it comes to the insurrection, because if he testified truthfully, something I think unlikely we will ever see Donald Trump do, testify truthfully, but if he did testify truthfully, he would incriminate himself regarding the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So now we have the battle of the constitutional rights. We've got the Proud Boys' Sixth Amendment right to compel witnesses. We have Donald Trump's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. If he's compelled to testify, he doesn't have to incriminate himself. So how do courts resolve this battle of the constitutional rights? I'm going to talk about how federal court resolves it. Other courts resolve it in different ways. For example, the local courts in Washington, D.C., the Superior Court for the District of Columbia, they handle it differently. Let's talk about how the federal court handles it, because that is where the Proud Boys are being prosecuted. Here's what will happen. In the event the subpoena is served on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump and his lawyers appear pursuant to that subpoena at the Proud Boys trial, let's assume that's the way this plays out. It may not. The judge may say, you know what, Donald Trump doesn't have relevant information to provide to this jury in the Proud Boys case, in my opinion, so I'm not even going to force the government to subpoena him and have him appear. Let's set that aside. Let's assume he does appear, he is subpoenaed. He will come into court with his counsel, and I can almost guarantee you, through counsel, he will assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He will decline to testify, at which point the judge will excuse Donald Trump, because even though the defendants have a Sixth Amendment right to call witnesses, they can't compel those witnesses to waive their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and force them to testify. The only way that would happen is if the prosecutors decided to grant the witness immunity to facilitate him testifying on behalf of the defense. That ain't happening. So I predict Donald Trump, if he's subpoenaed, if he is forced to appear in court with counsel, he'll plead the fifth, he'll be excused, and we will not see him testify. Though I would love to see him testify, and I'd love to see the prosecutors, some of whom are my former colleagues from the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, cross-examine Donald Trump if the Proud Boys tried to put him on the stand as a defense witness. But I think it extraordinarily unlikely that will happen. So, if Donald Trump doesn't testify, what about the defendant, the Proud Boys' Sixth Amendment right to compel witnesses in their favor? Well, there are some workarounds. And now we're going to take just another 2 or 3 minutes to do a quick class on the law of hearsay. Hearsay, I'm sure you've heard the term. The legal definition is an out-of-court statement, a statement that's made out of court, not in court, an out-of-court statement that is introduced in court to prove the truth of the matter in the statement, the truth of the matter asserted. And I'll use a concrete example. If the Proud Boys wanted to introduce Donald Trump's out-of-court statement, in other words, what he said at his pre-insurrection pep rally on the Ellipse on the morning of January 6th, let's assume they wanted to introduce that Donald Trump said, you know, you got to go to the Capitol and fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore because the election was rigged and your vote was stolen. Let's assume the Proud Boys wanted to introduce that out-of-court statement, that hearsay of Donald Trump. Well, it couldn't be introduced as evidence to prove the truth of the matter asserted. In other words, to prove that the election was actually rigged and votes were actually stolen. But here's the workaround, because there are lots of exceptions to the hearsay rule. The Proud Boys attorneys could say, well, Judge, we're not looking to introduce that statement for the truth of the matter asserted. We want to introduce that statement for the impact it had on the people who heard it, regardless of whether the election was actually rigged or votes were actually stolen. We want to introduce it for the impact the statement had on the people who heard it and responded after they heard it. That's an accepted reason to introduce an out-of-court statement that doesn't violate the hearsay rule. There are lots of workarounds. There are lots of exceptions to the hearsay rule. And I have a feeling if Donald Trump refuses to testify because he pleads the fifth, judges sometimes like to mitigate the damage to a defense case that is done when those constitutional rights collide and the defendant who's on trial is on the losing end of that collision. And judges will often find lots of creative ways to let evidence come in anyway that would have come in had the witness waived this Fifth Amendment right and agreed to testify. So, you know, I predict, I could be wrong, but I predict Trump will not testify, and I predict the judge will allow lots of Trump's statements to otherwise come into evidence under an exception to the hearsay rule. Friends, I know that was a quick down and dirty evidence class, you know, the rules of hearsay and the Fifth Amendment as it collides sometimes with the Sixth Amendment. And let me tell you, friends, these things happen in court every day. These constitutional rights collide, and different courts handle that collision in different ways. But I hope that has at least put in context what in the world is going on in this Proud Boys trial, with them wanting to call Donald Trump as a witness, because even if he were to testify, he's probably not going to say anything that's going to be, well, truthful or particularly helpful to the defendants. Let me leave you with this. This is also a tactical game that the defendants are playing, because if Donald Trump refuses to testify, I can promise you there will be an issue on appeal raised by the Proud Boys after they're convicted, and given the evidence against them, they are very likely to be convicted. They'll raise the issue that they were wrongfully deprived of their right to present evidence in violation of their Sixth Amendment right to compel the testimony of witnesses in their favor. That will probably be resolved against them in the appeal, but defendants sometimes will fight what they know to be losing battles because they want to preserve issues for appeal in hopes that maybe they can convince an appellate court that they didn't get a fair trial and that they are therefore entitled to a new trial. So friends, once this legal issue is resolved, whether the Proud Boys get to subpoena Donald Trump and put him on the stand to testify in their defense, none of that makes a lot of sense. But once it's resolved, the trial will, move forward to jury deliberations and I suspect guilty verdicts. And then our attention hopefully will turn to Donald Trump again, not because some defendant wants to call him as a witness, but because he'll be presented in court as a defendant after being indicted for his crimes. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again soon.